I had hoped this vacation would bring us closer together. Instead, it became the moment that shattered our marriage. My wife and I had been together for 10 years. On the surface, life was good. We had 2 incredible kids who meant everything to us, but over the years, something between us had shifted. Like so many parents, we got lost in the never-ending cycle of responsibilities. Morning routines, school drop-offs, work deadlines, doctor visits, and everything else that came with raising a family. By the time we finally collapsed into bed at night, we were too drained to have a real conversation, let alone feel truly connected. Every day felt like a repeat of the last. Mornings started early, with me helping to get the kids ready while my wife took care of breakfast. After work, we split the evening tasks, dinner, homework, bedtime, only to end up sitting silently in front of the TV before calling it a night. Even weekends didn't offer much relief. Between grocery runs, soccer games, and household chores, there was barely any time left for us. Somewhere along the way, we had lost the version of us that once existed. It hadn't always been this way. Back when we were dating, hours would pass in deep conversation, filled with laughter and inside jokes. But now, even when we had a rare moment of free time, we didn't seem to know what to do with it. The things we used to talk about had been replaced with mundane discussions about bills, schedules, and who was on carpool duty. That's when I suggested the trip. A vacation sounded like exactly what we needed. A break from the routine, a chance to focus on just the 2 of us. No kids, no work, just time to reconnect. I imagined peaceful walks on the beach, lazy mornings spent talking over coffee, and quiet dinners where we could finally be present with each other again. I believed this getaway would remind us why we had fallen in love in the first place. When I brought it up, she agreed almost instantly. Maybe she felt the growing distance too, or maybe she just wanted a change of scenery. Either way, we booked a trip to a tropical destination, hoping it would be the reset our marriage needed. For the first time in a long while, I felt excited, hopeful that this could bring us back to where we once were. We arrived at the resort just as the morning sun was rising. The warmth of the air, the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore, and the sound of carefree laughter from other guests filled the atmosphere. The beach stretched out endlessly before us, a perfect expanse of white sand meeting the glistening, crystal-clear water. For a brief moment, it felt like we had truly escaped. That first day was everything I had imagined. We walked along the shoreline, hand in hand, letting the water lap at our feet. She let out a laugh when a tiny crab scuttled past her toes, and I caught myself smiling. It had been weeks since I'd heard her sound that carefree. That night, we sat at a table overlooking the ocean, watching the sky explode in hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. As we sipped our drinks, we talked about how much we needed this break. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were reconnecting. But beneath the surface of that perfect setting, I began to notice the cracks. She seemed glued to her phone more than I liked, scrolling endlessly through social media or texting people back home. When I invited her to join me for an early morning walk along the beach, she brushed it off, saying she needed to catch up on sleep. It wasn't a big deal, but it stung. In the quiet moments, when we weren't swept up in the beauty of our surroundings, the space between us felt impossible to ignore. More than once, I caught her staring off into the distance, lost in thought, her expression unreadable. When I asked what was on her mind, she would offer a vague response, "Nothing important," before quickly changing the subject. I didn't push, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't as invested in this trip as I was. Still, I held on to hope. We had come here to rebuild what felt broken, to remember what had drawn us together in the first place. I convinced myself that these small moments of disconnection were just remnants of our hectic lives. This vacation was supposed to bring us back to each other. It had to. But the thing about cracks is that if you ignore them, they only deepen. And I was about to learn that no amount of picturesque sunsets or pristine beaches could repair what was already slipping away. One evening, the beach buzzed with life, a perfect mix of chaos and joy. The sky had turned a deep shade of orange as the sun melted into the horizon, casting a warm glow over the waves. The air vibrated with the rhythmic beats of Afro-Caribbean music blasting from nearby speakers, blending with the steady crash of the ocean and the sound of laughter from the growing crowd. Vendors wove through the throng, calling out their offers for cold drinks and snacks, their colorful carts adding to the festive energy. The center of the action was a makeshift stage near the water, illuminated by flickering tiki torches swaying in the evening breeze. A lively announcer, microphone in hand, hyped up the crowd, inviting participants to step forward for the night's big event, a dance competition. A semicircle of spectators clapped, whistled, and cheered as volunteers eagerly made their way toward the stage. And standing among them was my wife, her face glowing with the same excitement that had drawn me to her all those years ago. She had always loved dancing, and tonight was no exception. She turned to me, her eyes shining. "I want to do it," she said, her voice brimming with anticipation, like a child about to ask for a favor. Before I could react, she was already slipping off her sandals, moving toward the stage with unmistakable eagerness. First, I didn't think much of it. This was who she was, someone who thrived in moments like these, feeding off the energy of a lively crowd. It was just her way. I leaned back in my chair, drink in hand, watching her weave through the sea of people, her enthusiasm contagious. The announcer greeted her with an animated cheer, handing her a sash with a number to tie around her waist. The crowd erupted in applause as she stepped onto the stage. I let out a small chuckle. This was classic her, never one to sit on the sidelines when there was fun to be had. A part of me admired her for being so bold, for being able to throw herself into the moment without hesitation. But there was another side of me, the quieter, more reserved part, that preferred to stay back and watch. And that was fine. I was happy to let her enjoy herself while I remained on the sidelines. Her face lit up with excitement when the announcer called for participants in the local dance competition. At first, I didn't think much of it. It just seemed like another fun part of the vacation, something lighthearted and harmless. Another way for us to escape the weight of everyday life. Then he stepped forward. Her dance partner. He was a young, charismatic local, moving with the kind of confidence that naturally drew people in. There was an effortless ease about him, from his athletic build, likely shaped by hours spent in the ocean or on a soccer field, to the way he carried himself like he already owned the dance floor. Before the music even started, he exuded a presence that demanded attention. With a playful bow, he introduced himself, and my wife giggled, slipping her hand into his without a second thought. From that moment on, it was like I had disappeared. As they started dancing, I watched him spin her effortlessly, making her laugh, making her blush. She looked weightless, completely lost in the moment, a version of herself I hadn't seen in a long time, carefree, glowing. At first, I told myself this was good for her. She deserved to let loose, to enjoy herself. But as the dance went on, a tight knot formed in my stomach. The way he held her waist, the way she leaned into him, the way their bodies moved together, it was too much. I stood there among the crowd, clapping awkwardly like everyone else, but I felt completely detached. The lively music, meant to be festive and fun, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every laugh, every lingering touch, felt like a sharp jab straight to my chest. Was this really just about the dance? Or was it about everything we had ignored for so long? The distance, the silence, the way she constantly sought validation from others instead of me? When the music finally stopped, the crowd erupted into cheers, but I could barely hear it over the rush of anger rising inside me. As they took their bows and exchanged smiles, I knew I couldn't just stand there. I had to say something. I walked over, trying to keep my tone calm, though my frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked. She frowned but followed me a few steps away from the crowd. I could feel the heat in my chest, the words pressing against my throat. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight with restraint. This doesn't feel right. I think you should stop." She looked at me, confusion flashing across her face before it hardened into something else. Defiance. "What's the problem?" she snapped. "It's just a dance. We're on vacation. Can't I have a little fun?" I tried to explain, to make her understand how it felt, how much it hurt to see her like that with someone else. But she wasn't listening. Her voice sharpened. We're married, but that doesn't mean you own me. You don't get to tell me what to do. Her words hit like a slap. That wasn't what this was about. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted her to care, to at least acknowledge what this was doing to me. But in that moment I realized she didn't. This wasn't just about the dance. It was about how far apart we had grown, how little she seemed to value what we once had. I swallowed hard, pushing down everything I wanted to say, and gave her one last warning. If you go back out there and dance with him again, you won't find me here when you come back. She laughed. She actually laughed, as if I had just told a joke. Then, without hesitation, she turned on her heel and walked straight back to him. The music started again, and for a few seconds, I stood there watching, frozen in place. She smiled at him, spun under his arm, laughed like nothing had happened, like I wasn't even there. And in that moment, I finally admitted to myself what I had been avoiding for years. Our marriage had been broken for a long time. While she danced, I stood motionless, realizing how many signs I had ignored. The silent dinners where we barely spoke. The nights spent lost in our phones instead of talking to each other. The way she always seemed distant, and how I convinced myself it was just stress, just exhaustion, just life. But it wasn't. That dance was just the final, undeniable proof of what I had been too afraid to face. I turned and walked away. I didn't storm off. I didn't yell her name. There was no point. She didn't even notice I was gone. By the time I reached our hotel room, the emptiness hit me like a tidal wave. Not just the physical silence of the space, but the deeper, heavier kind. The kind that makes you realize just how alone you really are. I started packing. My hands moved without thought, stuffing clothes into my suitcase, grabbing my essentials. I didn't even have a plan. No idea where I was going or what I would do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep standing there, watching the woman I had built a life with prioritize a fleeting moment with a stranger over the man she had promised to love forever. With trembling fingers, I booked a taxi to the airport. Sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase I had just zipped shut, reality sank in. I wasn't just leaving this trip. I was leaving the life I had envisioned for us. The dreams we had built. The woman I once thought was my forever. But in that moment, one thing became clear. I deserved more. Not perfection. Not some unrealistic fairy tale. Just someone who chose me. Someone who saw me. And as I stepped into the cab and told the driver to head to the airport, I felt the crushing weight of everything I was leaving behind. Yet, for the first time in a long while, I also felt something else. Clarity. Because sometimes, the only way to find yourself again is to finally let go. When I arrived home, the silence felt different than it ever had before. It wasn't just the kind that fills a house after a long day or when the kids are at school. It was the silence of something missing. No sound of her moving around, no familiar laughter, no faint traces of her favorite music playing from another room. I sank onto the couch, staring at the empty space where she would usually curl up with a book or her phone. The memories hit me all at once. I thought about how we met, about the way her smile used to light up a room, about the nights we would talk for hours dreaming about the future. And now that future was gone. Back then, it felt like nothing could touch us, like we were unshakable. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being us. Life piled on: work, kids, bills, and the things that once brought us together got lost in the shuffle. Conversations became quick check-ins about schedules and groceries, and the connection we once had faded beneath the weight of routine and neglect. I kept replaying that moment on the beach, the way she laughed at me, her expression full of defiance. "You don't own me." That hit like a punch to the gut. She hadn't felt free in our marriage for a long time, and I hadn't even noticed. Maybe I had been holding on too tightly, trying to control things when all she really wanted was space to breathe. But it wasn't just her words that hurt. It was the way she chose to walk away. Right back to that dance floor, to a stranger who could make her laugh in a way I hadn't in years. That image burned in my mind, seared itself into my memory. I realized then that I had been clinging to an idea of our marriage, not the reality of it. I had convinced myself that we could still fix things, that we were just in a rough patch. But the truth was, we had been broken for a long time. We just hadn't wanted to admit it. I thought about the good times, holidays, birthdays, nights spent talking about everything and nothing. I wanted to hold onto those memories, to use them as proof that what we had was worth saving. But the harder I tried, the more they slipped away, like sand through my fingers. And in the end, they weren't enough. Love alone wasn't enough to fix something that had already fallen apart. Sitting there in the quiet of our home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, of course. Mourning the life we had built together, a life that was now unraveling. But there was also relief. Relief that I no longer had to keep fighting for something neither of us could save. It wasn't bitterness or resentment. It was just acceptance. A bittersweet understanding that no matter how much history two people share, sometimes they still drift too far apart to find their way back. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in a marriage that felt more like a battle than a partnership. Leaving her on that beach wasn't just about the dance. It was about reclaiming my own sense of worth, my own happiness. And while the pain of letting go was real, so was the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better for both of us. After that vacation, my wife's life took a different turn. At first, she didn't seem to grasp the weight of what had happened. When she came home, she walked into an empty house. A house we had once built together as a symbol of us. My things were gone. The rooms felt colder. The silence echoed louder than any words I could have said. She called me a few times that first week. Her voice was a mix of confusion and irritation, like she couldn't understand why I had left or why I wouldn't just come back and pretend none of it had happened. I tried to explain. I tried to make her see that this wasn't just about one night or one dance or one man. It was about years of feeling invisible. It was about her constantly searching for validation from everyone except me. It was about the cracks in our marriage that she refused to acknowledge. Over time, the calls became less frequent. Maybe she was finally starting to accept that we were truly over. She stopped asking me to come back and started focusing on her own life instead. At the end of the day, all that mattered to me were the kids. That moment on the beach might have been the final straw. But the truth? Our marriage had ended long before she ever stepped into his arms. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.